We called it Far Harbor, a name that must have been chosen in irony by some long-dead optimist. There was nothing far about it. The world had shrunk to this single, miserable dock town. And there was no harbor, not really. Just a collection of rotting piers and sunken boats that served as a breakwater against the Atlantic, which itself seemed tired of beating against our shores. The real enemy was not the ocean. The real enemy was the fog. Every morning began the same. I would wake in my cramped alcove, a space carved out of the rusted-out shell of a fishing trawler that had been permanently welded to the main dock. The first sensation was always the cold, a dampness that clung to my bones deeper than any winter chill I had known before the island. The second was the low, laboring hum of the fog condensers. It was the heartbeat of our town, a weak and faltering pulse that kept the worst of the fog at bay. When that hum faltered, even for a moment, the entire population of Far Harbor would hold its breath, a collective silent prayer sent up to whatever deaf god still presided over this forsaken rock. My job, like the jobs of most of the able-bodied, was maintenance. Not the skilled kind, not the work of a machinist or an engineer. We had one of those, a man named Jules, who spent his days coaxing life back into pre-war machinery with a mixture of scavenged parts and desperate hope. My work was cruder. I was part of the crew that patched the hull. We used scrap metal, salvaged timbers, anything we could find to plug the holes gnawed by time and the ceaseless, corrosive damp. It was a task of endless futility, like trying to bail out the ocean with a leaky bucket. For every patch we welded or nailed into place, another section of the wall would groan and threaten to collapse. The hull was not a wall, it was a scar, and we were just tending to its constant weeping wounds. That morning, the hum of the condensers was weaker than usual. It had a ragged, stuttering quality, like the breathing of a dying man. I pulled on my worn leather coat, the material stiff and cracked from years of exposure to the salt and the mist. The air tasted of rust and something else, something acrid and chemical that spoke of failing electronics. Out on the main dock, Captain Avery was already there, her silhouette a stark, unyielding line against the grey morning. She stood with her arms crossed, staring up at the nearest condenser, a massive, rust-streaked turbine that was supposed to suck in the poisoned air and spit out a perimeter of breathable, visible space. It was barely doing its job. The fog, a thick, milky white bank of vapor, lapped at the edges of our cleared zone, a hungry tide waiting for the machines to fail. "Silas," she said without turning. Her voice was like gravel sifted through sand, rough but steady. "Hear that?" I did not need to ask what she meant. The condenser was whining, a high-pitched keen that set my teeth on edge. "It sounds bad, Captain." "It is bad," she confirmed, finally turning to look at me. The face of Avery was a map of the island, every line a story of loss and hardship. Her eyes, though, were still sharp, missing nothing. "Jules says the primary gyro is shot. He can try to bypass it, but the power drain will be immense. We will have to cut rations on the water purifiers again." A low murmur of discontent went through the small crowd that had gathered. Water was life, but the condensers were the wall that protected that life. It was always a choice between slow thirst and a quick, violent death in the fog. Most days, we chose thirst. Alan Lee, the proprietor of the town's only gun shop, pushed his way to the front. He was a thick-set man with a perpetually angry expression, his hands stained with gun oil and powder. "Sabotage," he spat, the word a curse. "It is always sabotage. Those glowing freaks up at the Nucleus. They are doing this. They want us dead." "We do not know that, Alan," Avery said, her tone level, betraying no emotion. "The hell we do not," he shot back, his voice rising. "Every time a condenser fails, we find their symbols scratched into the casing. Every time a trapper goes missing, their bodies turn up picked clean, closer and closer to their shrine. They are testing us, pushing us." He was not wrong. The Children of Atom, a cult of radiation worshippers who had taken over the old naval submarine base in the island's interior, were a constant, menacing presence. They saw the fog as a holy gift, a manifestation of their atomic god. Our condensers, to them, were blasphemy. They believed we were denying Atom's holy embrace. We called it surviving. They called it heresy. The argument was an old one, a script we had all memorized. Alan would call for war, for a preemptive strike to wipe out the Nucleus. Avery would preach caution, reminding us that we were outnumbered, outgunned, and that a direct conflict would be suicide. The rest of us would stand around, shifting our weight, feeling the familiar knot of fear tighten in our guts. We were trapped, not just by the fog, but by our own weakness. But what no one expected was the sound that came next. It was not the shriek of dying machinery. It was the splintering of wood and the deep, guttural roar of something that should not exist. The fog surged. The failing condenser gave one last, pathetic cough and died. Darkness and mist flooded the western edge of the dock in an instant. The perimeter was breached. Panic erupted. People screamed and scrambled for cover, for the relative safety of the larger wrecks or the last plank, our only tavern. Then came the second roar, closer this time, and the heavy, thudding footsteps of something massive moving through the mist. I drew the pipe pistol I carried, its weight a pathetic comfort in my hand. Beside me, Alan had already shouldered a combat rifle, its sleek, military lines a stark contrast to my own cobbled-together weapon. To the hull, Avery yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line!" We ran toward the breach, our boots pounding on the wet, rotting planks. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own feet. It was cold, and it carried a strange, metallic scent, the smell of radiation. The dosimeter on my belt began to click, a frantic, insect-like sound that was more terrifying than any roar. The clicks grew faster, blurring into a steady, angry buzz. The rads were high, dangerously high. A shape resolved itself out of the mist. It was huge, a hulking crustacean horror with massive, scythe-like claws and a carapace as thick as a vault door. A fog crawler. Its multiple small eyes glowed with a sickly green light, fixing on the nearest settler, a young woman named Marge, who had frozen in terror. Time seemed to slow down. Alan opened fire, the combat rifle barking a steady rhythm of defiance. The bullet sparked and ricocheted off the creature's shell, doing little more than annoying it. I raised my own pistol, took aim, and fired. The shot was pitifully weak, a small pop in the cacophony. The crawler swiped a claw, not at Alan, but at Marge. She disappeared in a red spray. There was no scream, just a wet, tearing sound. We called it survival. It was something uglier. It was the act of watching your neighbor die and feeling a flicker of relief that it was not you. More shapes were moving in the fog now. I could hear them, slithering and clicking and croaking. Anglers, with their glowing lures bobbing in the mist. Gulpers, great fleshy amphibians that slid from the water onto the docks, their huge mouths gaping. The breach was not just a hole, it was a floodgate. The island was pouring in. We fell back, forming a ragged line near the center of town. Every shot was a prayer. Every reload was a frantic, fumbling gasp for a few more seconds of life. Jules, the engineer, managed to get a couple of the automated turrets back online. Their heavy caliber rounds tore into the smaller creatures, but the fog crawler seemed unstoppable. It smashed through a fish-packing shack as if it were made of matchsticks, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. I was pressed back against the wall of the last plank, jamming another crude shell into my pistol. A gulper, slick and bloated, lunged at me. I fired at point-blank range, the shot blowing a chunk of flesh from its side. It staggered, but it did not fall. It reeked of rot and dead fish. Its maw opened, wide enough to swallow me whole. I braced for the end. Then, a harpoon slammed into its side with enough force to lift it off its feet and send it careening into the water. I looked up to the roof of the bait shop. Cassie Dalton stood there, a harpoon gun braced on her shoulder. Her face was grim, her knuckles white, but her aim was true. She was a Dalton, and her family had been hunting the creatures of this island for generations, long before the bombs fell and twisted them into what they were today. It was in her blood. The fight raged for what felt like an eternity. We lost more people. I saw a man I shared morning rations with dragged into the water by an angler. I saw another cornered by two gulpers, his screams cut short. The fog crawler finally went down when Avery, with a courage I could never fathom, managed to attach a plasma mine to its leg. The resulting explosion was a flash of green light and a shower of chitinous gore. The blast nearly took her with it, but it turned the tide. The remaining creatures, leaderless and disorganized, retreated back into the fog. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fires, the moans of the wounded, and the steady, insistent buzz of our dosimeters. The fog did not recede. It hung there just beyond the reach of the remaining overworked condensers, a silent, patient predator. We had survived, but people assumed this was victory. They assumed wrong. We had not won. We had merely postponed our extinction. The breach was a gaping wound in our defenses. The condenser was a heap of scrap. We were low on ammunition, lower on medicine, and lowest of all on hope. That evening, a meeting was held in the last plank. The air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey and blood. Avery stood on a crate, her face illuminated by a single flickering lantern. She looked 10 years older than she had that morning. "We lost 6 people today," she began, her voice heavy. 6 friends, 6 neighbors, Marge, Henry, Paul. We cannot sustain these kinds of losses. The hull is compromised. The western condenser is gone. If we do not do something, the next attack will be our last. Alan Lee was there, cleaning his rifle, his movements sharp and angry. I have been saying it for years. We need to hit the children. We need to take the fight to them. We march on the Nucleus and burn it to the ground. A few of the younger, hotter-headed settlers grunted in agreement, but the older ones, the ones who had seen more than their share of death, remained silent. Cassie Dalton spoke up from the back, her voice quiet but clear. "And how many of us will die on that march, Alan? The Nucleus is a fortress. It is flooded with radiation. We would be dead before we even saw their gates. My grandfather tried to clear out that base 50 years ago. He took 20 good men with him. None of them came back. So we just sit here and wait to die?" Alan shot back. "We patch the hull with spit and prayers while those lunatics dismantle our defenses piece by piece." "There has to be another way," Cassie insisted. "This island, it provides. There are resources out there. Old military installations, bunkers. There might be parts, technology, something that could help us." "Scavenging in the fog is a suicide mission," Alan scoffed. Staying here is a suicide mission, Cassie replied, her gaze unwavering. The tavern was divided. Fear and anger warred with exhaustion and despair. I listened to them argue, the words washing over me. They were all right, and they were all wrong. Attacking the Nucleus was madness. Hiding behind our crumbling walls was also madness. Scrabbling for scraps in the fog was the longest shot of all. It was a choice between 3 different ways to die. Then Avery's eyes fell on me. Silas. The room went quiet. I was not a leader. I was not a fighter, not really. I was a mender of walls. A man who kept his head down and did his job. You know the island better than most, she said. You have been on scavenging runs to the old logging camps. You know how to move without being seen. It was true. I had a knack for it, a quietness of foot, a patience for watching and waiting. In a town of loud, angry survivors, I was quiet. I need you to go out there, find out what is happening. Get a look at the Nucleus, see how strong they are. See if this was a coordinated attack or just a probe. And if you find anything at all that could help us, parts for the condenser, weapons, medicine, you bring it back. Alan snorted. You are sending one man to do a job for an army. I am sending one man to be my eyes and ears, Avery corrected him, her voice sharp as broken glass. An army would be seen a mile away. Silas can move through the fog. He can be a ghost. A ghost. That was what it took to survive on this island. You had to become as silent and as unseen as the fog itself. I looked around the room, at the tired, frightened faces, at Alan, his jaw set in a stubborn line of rage, at Cassie, her eyes holding a strange mixture of hope and sorrow, at Avery, her expression asking more of me than I believed I had to give. What happens when the last clean water runs out? What happens when the last wall falls? You send one man out into the poison, hoping he can find a miracle in the ruins of the old world. I did not want to go. The fear was a cold, solid thing in my stomach. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to stay within the humming circle of the condensers and take my chances with the rest of them. But I saw the face of Marge, just before the claw took her. I saw the empty spaces at the bar where Henry and Paul used to sit. To do nothing was to accept that their deaths were meaningless, just another tick on a clock counting down to 0. All right, I said, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. I will go. The decision hung in the air, heavy and final. There was no cheering, no pats on the back, just a grim, collective understanding. I was walking out into the grave of the world, and my chances of coming back were slim. They thought the vault kept them safe. On the mainland, I heard stories of people who lived their whole lives underground. They thought steel doors and concrete walls could save them from the end of the world. It kept them contained. Here, our walls were rust and scrap, and our vault was a circle of barely functioning machines. But the principle was the same. We were contained, waiting for the inevitable failure. My mission was to break that containment, if only for a little while. I spent the next day preparing. I did not take much. The less I carried, the faster I could move. A few tins of preserved meat, a canteen of purified water, which felt more precious than gold, a handful of Radex and Stimpaks from the town's meager medical supplies. I traded my pipe pistol to Alan for a slightly more reliable 10mm pistol and 3 full clips of ammunition. He did not want to part with it, but Avery insisted. He is going out there for all of us, she told him, her voice leaving no room for argument. He also gave me a combat knife, its edge freshly sharpened. For when the bullets run out, he said, not unkindly. Cassie found me As I was checking the seals on my gas mask, she handed me a small leather-bound book. My great-grandfather's journal, she explained. He was a trapper, knew this island like the back of his hand, mapped out old trails, caves, places the fog lies thin. It might help. I took it, the worn leather cool against my palm. Thank you, Cassie. Be careful, Silas, she said, her eyes searching mine. The fog, it does more than just hide things. It gets inside your head, makes you see things, hear things. Do not listen. Her warning lingered with me as I stood at the makeshift gate in the hull the next morning. The town was quiet, the settlers watching me from doorways and windows, their faces pale and drawn in the grey light. Avery gave me a single firm nod. Alan, surprisingly, clapped me on the shoulder. Give them hell, he muttered. Then the gate was winched open, and I stepped outside the perimeter. The fog enveloped me instantly. The world of Far Harbor, the humming condensers, the scent of wood smoke and cooking fish, all of it vanished behind me, swallowed by the mist. The air here was different. It was thick, heavy, and wet, clinging to my clothes and skin. The metallic taste of radiation was strong, and the only sound was the muffled hiss of my own breathing through the gas mask's filter. My dosimeter began its nervous chatter, a constant companion in the silence. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. The first few hours were a nerve-shredding ordeal. I followed one of the old, overgrown roads that led away from the coast, using the cracked asphalt as a guide. The world was a monochrome palette of grey and darker grey. Twisted skeletal trees loomed out of the mist like silent sentinels. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Every rustle in the undergrowth sounded like the scuttling of some unseen horror. I kept my pistol in my hand, my thumb on the safety, my knuckles white. I remembered the words of Cassie about the fog getting into your head. It was true. The sensory deprivation was disorienting. Without a horizon, without landmarks, my sense of direction began to fray. I started to see shapes in the swirling vapors, crouching figures, leaping beasts, things that vanished the moment I focused on them. Phantoms of the mist. I had to stop several times, closing my eyes, taking deep breaths, and focusing on the solid reality of the cracked road beneath my boots. The journal of Cassie's great-grandfather was a lifesaver. It was filled with hand-drawn maps and notes, observations about wind patterns and animal trails. He wrote of strange fungi that grew in hollow logs and gave off a faint phosphorescent light. He described the way the rocks were shaped in certain valleys, knowledge that allowed me to navigate by touch as much as by sight. Following his almost forgotten paths, I was able to move away from the coast and deeper into the island's interior, into the places where the fog was thickest. By midday, I found the first sign of the Children of Atom. It was a crude shrine built at a crossroads, a collection of rusted metal parts, gears, pipes, engine blocks, had been welded together into a grotesque idol, meant to represent their god. At its base were offerings, irradiated packets of food, strange, glowing fungi, and the skull of a mirelurk, its eye sockets painted with glowing green paint. A symbol was scrawled on the road in the same paint, a circle with 3 triangles inside, the mark of Atom. Alan was right. They had been this close to the town. This led directly to a heightened sense of paranoia. They were not just hiding in their base. They were active. They were proselytizing to the wasteland itself. They were marking their territory, and we were living on it. I did not linger. The dosimeter was buzzing angrily near the shrine. The offerings were pulsing with radiation. I took a dose of Rad-X, the bitter, chalky pill dissolving on my tongue, and moved on, my pace quickening. The feeling of being watched intensified. I felt like a trespasser in a vast, malevolent church. Later that afternoon, I had my first encounter. I was skirting the edge of a mire, a swampy expanse of stagnant water and rotting trees, when I heard a low, guttural croak. I froze, crouching behind a fallen log. A gulper slid out of the murky water. It was even bigger than the ones that had attacked the dock, its skin a mottled, unhealthy green. But it was not alone. A figure in a strange, hooded robe stood before it. The robe was a patchwork of rags and metal plates, and the figure wore a gas mask that distorted their voice when they spoke. A child of Atom. They held a gamma gun, a bizarre weapon that hummed with a sickly green energy. The child was not fighting the gulper. They were feeding it. They tossed a piece of irradiated meat onto the ground, and the creature greedily snapped it up. The child then reached out a hand and touched the gulper's slimy hide. The creature did not attack. It seemed almost docile. "Yes, child of Atom," the robed figure croaked, their voice amplified and distorted by the mask. "Feast on his holy glow. Be filled with his division. You are a creature of the fog, a true believer." I watched, my blood running cold. They had not just learned to live with the island's monsters. They had tamed them, or if not tamed, they had at least reached some kind of unholy understanding. This was not just a cult. This was an ecosystem, and we were the intruders. The thought was chilling. We were fighting the fog, fighting the creatures, fighting the children. They were all one and the same. The consequence was immediate and terrifying. Our entire strategy, our entire worldview, was based on the idea of holding back the wilderness. But what if the wilderness had a will of its own? What if it had a god? I backed away slowly, carefully, not making a sound. The child and their pet did not notice me. I circled wide around the mire, my mind reeling. The problem was so much bigger than we had understood. We were not just fighting a band of fanatics. We were fighting a religion that had weaponized the entire island against us. Liberation looked a lot like extinction from where I stood. I pressed on, pushing myself harder, fueled by a new and more profound fear. I had to reach the Nucleus. I had to see the heart of this madness for myself. The maps in the journal led me up into the highlands, a region of jagged hills and sparse petrified forests. The fog thinned slightly here, allowing glimpses of a bruised purple sky. The radiation, however, grew stronger. The ground itself seemed to hum with it. I was getting close. The submarine came into view abruptly. One moment, I was climbing a rocky ridge. The next, I was looking down into a crater, and in the center of that crater, half submerged in a pool of glowing green water, was a massive black metal whale, the USS Triton. A pre-war nuclear submarine cracked open like a seed pod, its innards spilling out to form the foundation of their base, the Nucleus. It was a fortress, just as Cassie had said. The crater was a natural kill zone. The entrance was a narrow ramp leading down to the conning tower, and it was heavily guarded. I could see figures in patchwork armor patrolling the perimeter, armed with radium rifles and gamma guns. Makeshift watchtowers had been constructed from scrap metal, and searchlights cut through the gloom. The air itself shimmered with heat and radiation. My dosimeter screamed a constant, unbroken alarm. I had to take another dose of Rad-X just to keep the needle out of the red. Assaulting this place would not be a battle. It would be a massacre. Alan's plan was pure, unadulterated suicide. We would be cut down before we got halfway down the ramp. We did not have the numbers, the weapons, or the radiation resistance to even attempt it. I spent the rest of the day observing from the ridge, using a pair of binoculars I had scavenged. I watched their patrols. I watched their strange rituals, which seemed to involve chanting and bathing in the irradiated water at the base of the submarine. They were completely insane, but they were also disciplined. They moved with purpose. They were true believers, and that made them more dangerous than any raider gang. As dusk fell, a new figure emerged from the submarine. They were taller than the others, and their armor was more ornate, decorated with glowing vials of radioactive material. Even from a distance, they radiated an aura of authority. The other children bowed their heads as they passed. This had to be their leader, the High Confessor. I knew I had to get closer. I had to hear what they were saying. This was what Avery had sent me for, the intel, the truth. Waiting until the dead of night, when the patrols were at their thinnest, I began to make my way down the side of the crater. I did not use the main ramp. Instead, I used the skills of a scavenger, picking my way through the loose scree and jagged rocks, moving from shadow to shadow. It was slow, agonizing work. A single misplaced foot, a single dislodged stone, would give me away. I found a spot behind a large, half-buried piece of machinery, not 50 yards from the main entrance. From here, I could hear the High Confessor addressing a gathering of his followers. His voice was not the distorted croak of the figure I had seen in the mire. It was powerful, resonant, a preacher's voice that boomed across the crater. "Brothers, sisters, Atom's blessings upon you," he began, his arms outstretched. "The hour of judgment is at hand. For years we have lived in the embrace of his holy fog, while the heretics on the coast cower behind their blasphemous machines. They deny his gift. They spit upon his sacrament." The crowd roared its approval. "We have sent them warnings," the High Confessor continued, his voice rising in fervor. "We have disabled their totems one by one. We have shown them the weakness of their flesh, the frailty of their false security. We have offered them the truth of division. But they are blind. They cling to their rotting world, their world of rust and decay." He paused, letting the silence hang in the irradiated air. "The time for warnings is over," he declared, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "Atom has shown me the way. The fog is his breath, and it will scour the unbelievers from his holy island. The children of the fog, the crawlers and the anglers, they are his angels, and they will tear down the walls of the heretics. We will march, not as an army of men, but as a crusade of faith. We will bring Atom's glorious division to Far Harbor, and the waters themselves will glow with their cleansing." The crater erupted in a frenzy of religious ecstasy. They were not just planning to sabotage us. They were planning a full-scale holy war, an extermination. My blood ran cold. This was worse than I had imagined. Alan was right about their intentions, but he was wrong about the solution. We could not fight this. It was not an army. It was a tide of faith, and it was about to wash over us. I had to get this information back to Avery. But as I began to creep away, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. My heart stopped. I spun around, my knife already in my hand, but it was too late. Two of the children had me, their grips like iron. They had come up behind me without a sound. My mission as a ghost had failed. "A spy from the harbor," one of them rasped, his face hidden behind a skull-like mask. "The High Confessor will be pleased." They dragged me down the ramp, my boots scraping on the metal. I did not struggle. It was pointless. I was surrounded, deep in enemy territory. The gathered cultists parted before us, their faces a mixture of hatred and pious curiosity. They shoved me forward until I was standing before the High Confessor himself. He was even more imposing up close. His armor was a masterpiece of salvaged technology, interwoven with bones and glowing tubes. His mask was fashioned from the skull of some large beast, its features twisted into a permanent, snarling grin. He looked down at me, and I could feel the intensity of his gaze through the mask's dark lenses. "So," the High Confessor said, his voice a low rumble, "the little mice of the harbor have sent a scout. What is your name, heretic?" I remained silent. Giving him my name felt like a surrender I was not willing to make. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "It does not matter. Soon, you will have a new name. You will be known as another martyr to a dead world. Tell me, why do you cling to your pathetic existence? Why do you hide from Atom's love?" "We call it breathing," I said, my voice hoarse. "Breathing?" he scoffed. "You call that foul, recycled air breathing? You huddle in the dark, breathing the ghost of a world that choked on its own arrogance. Out here in the fog we breathe deep. We breathe the very essence of creation. The glow of Atom is life itself. It is change. It is evolution. You are stagnant. You are decay. We are the future." They dragged me into the submarine. The interior was a claustrophobic maze of tight corridors and cramped chambers, all lit by the eerie green glow of exposed radioactive material. The air was thick with ozone and incense. Everywhere, the symbol of Atom was painted on the walls. They threw me into a small, dark cell, the metal door clanging shut with a sound of utter finality. I was a prisoner. My mission was a catastrophic failure. Far Harbor was facing an invasion, and the only person who knew the full extent of the threat was locked in a cage in the heart of the enemy's fortress, waiting to die. The silence of the cell was worse than the noise of the fog. It gave me too much time to think, too much time to wonder how many people would die because I had failed. The hours crawled by, or maybe it was days. Time had no meaning in the constant dim green light of the nucleus. They brought me food and water, both of which tasted metallic and set my dosimeter buzzing. I ate and drank sparingly, not trusting them, hoarding what little strength I had left. My mind raced, searching for an escape, but the cell was solid steel. There was no way out. I thought about the faces in Far Harbor, Avery's tired resolve, Alan's impotent rage, Cassie's sad, knowing eyes. I had let them all down. They were waiting for a report that would never come. Soon, they would be overwhelmed by a wave of fanatics and mutated monsters, and my bones would be just another relic in this radioactive tomb. Then, the door to my cell opened. It was not one of the guards. It was a different figure, someone I had not seen before. They wore the robes of the children, but they were smaller, and they moved with a quiet grace that was different from the lumbering zeal of the others. They entered my cell and closed the door behind them. "We must speak," the figure said. The voice was female, and it lacked the fanatical edge of the others. It was calm, measured. "There is nothing to talk about," I said, staying on my feet, ready for a trick. The figure reached up and removed her mask. The face beneath was surprisingly young, though marked by the telltale signs of radiation exposure. Pale skin, a certain gauntness around the eyes. But her expression was intelligent and, to my surprise, compassionate. "My name is Zealot Ware," she said. "I am a dissenter." A dissenter. The word was a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness. "A dissenter, here. High Confessor Tectus is a fanatic," she said, her voice low. "He preaches a gospel of destruction. He believes Atom's gift is an ending, a final, glorious division that will wipe the slate clean. But some of us believe he is wrong. Wrong how? I asked, my curiosity overriding my suspicion. Atom is not about death, Ware explained, her eyes burning with a different kind of faith. It is about change, transformation, rebirth, the fog, the radiation. It is a crucible. It is meant to burn away our old, weak forms and reshape us into something greater. Tectus sees only the fire. He does not see the phoenix that will rise from the ashes. His crusade against Far Harbor is a perversion of the faith. It is a pointless, hateful act. He seems to have plenty of followers who disagree with you, I pointed out. They are scared, she said simply. Tectus offers them simple answers. He gives them an enemy to hate. It is easier than grappling with the true, awesome mystery of Atom's will. But his path leads only to more death, more destruction. It does not lead to transcendence. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because I need your help, she said, her gaze intense. There is a place, a sanctuary for synths, high in the mountains. It is called Acadia. They are led by a machine, a prototype synth named DiMA. He is wise. He understands balance. He has technology that could help us. Technology that could show Tectus the error of his ways, or stop him if it comes to that. Synths. The stories from the Commonwealth were terrifying. Boogeymen who replaced people, who looked and acted human until they revealed their true mechanical nature. A sanctuary for them? On this island? It seemed impossible. Why would they help you? Why would they help me? Because DiMA believes in peace, Ware said. He has been trying to mediate between Far Harbor and the Nucleus for years, working from the shadows. He knows that Tectus's war will destroy everyone, including his own people, if the conflict draws attention from the mainland. He has a plan, but he needs someone to act as an intermediary. Someone who is not a child of Atom. Someone from Far Harbor. She was offering me a way out, a chance, but it was a strange and dangerous one. Trusting a synth, an artificial man. It went against every instinct, every horror story I had ever heard. But what choice did I have? Stay here and rot, or take a chance on the unknown? How do I get out of here? I asked. Zealot Ware smiled, a small, sad smile. There is a drainage pipe that leads from the lower levels of the submarine out into the irradiated water. The guards avoid it. The radiation levels are extreme, but it is the only way. I can create a diversion, give you a few minutes. It will be enough. She handed me a small packet. This is the most potent Radex we have. A single massive dose. It will not make you immune, but it might keep you alive long enough to get clear of the Nucleus. After that, you are on your own. Head for the highest peak on the island. Look for an old observatory. That is Acadia. The plan was insane. A swim through a radioactive cesspool, followed by a trek through a hostile, monster-infested wilderness, all to find a mythical city of robots led by a machine god. It was a fool's errand, but it was better than no errand at all. Do it, I said. The diversion was a series of explosions from the far side of the crater. Alarms blared. Shouts echoed through the metal corridors. Ware unlocked my cell. Go now, she urged. Atom guide you. I did not believe in her god, but I appreciated the sentiment. I ran. The lower levels of the submarine were a hellscape of leaking pipes, sparking conduits, and pools of glowing green sludge. The air was so thick with radiation it felt like I was breathing fire. My dosimeter shrieked, its needle pinned in the highest register. I swallowed the Radex from Ware, the pill a lump of grit in my dry throat. I found the drainage pipe, a narrow, rust-eaten tube, half filled with stagnant, glowing water. It smelled of death and decay. I took a deep breath, held it, and plunged in. The water was cold, shockingly cold, but it also burned. It felt like dipping my body in acid. The Radex was working. I could feel it dulling the worst of the sting, but I knew my body was soaking up a lethal dose of radiation. I pushed forward, crawling through the pipe, the rough metal scraping my skin. The light at the end seemed a universe away. My lungs were screaming for air. Black spots danced in my vision. I was not going to make it. I was going to die here, drowned in atomic waste. But then my hand broke the surface. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of the foggy night air, and hauled myself out of the water onto a muddy bank. I lay there for a long time, coughing and shivering, my body a symphony of pain. Every cell felt like it was on fire. I was alive, but I was poisoned. The radiation was inside me now, a permanent part of my biology. I was one step closer to the ghouls I had seen, shambling through the ruins of the mainland. But I was free. I looked back at the Nucleus, a glowing green scar in the darkness. They would be hunting for me soon. I had to move. I consulted the journal of Cassie's great-grandfather, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I found the section on the mountains, the high peaks that dominated the center of the island. Then, using the North Star, which was just barely visible through a thin patch in the fog, I found my bearing and began to climb. The journey to Acadia was a blur of misery. The radiation sickness was setting in. I was weak, nauseous, and my vision swam in and out of focus. Every step was an effort of will. The island seemed determined to kill me. I was stalked by wolves, twisted by radiation into gaunt, hairless predators. I stumbled into a nest of mirelurks and only escaped by throwing myself into a freezing river and letting the current carry me away. I survived on nuts and berries and the few remaining tins of meat I had. I refilled my canteen from streams, hoping the water was not too contaminated, but knowing it was. I was getting weaker, and my supply of chems was running out. I was dying. Just when I was about to give up, to lie down and let the fog take me, I saw it. High above me, perched on the summit of the tallest mountain, was the unmistakable silhouette of a radio observatory. A great white dome, stark against the grey sky. Acadia. The final climb was the hardest thing I have ever done. I crawled most of the way, my fingers raw, my muscles screaming in protest. But the sight of the observatory, a promise of sanctuary, of answers, drove me on. The entrance was not guarded, but the doors were thick steel. I pounded on them with what little strength I had left, my voice a ragged croak. "Hello? Is anyone there, please? Help me." For a long time, there was no answer. I slumped against the door, my hope draining away. This was it. I had made it, only to die on the doorstep. Then I heard the sound of gears turning. The heavy door slid open with a hiss of pneumatics. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright light from within. It was not human. Its body was a skeletal framework of metal and wires, its face a smooth, featureless plate with two glowing optic sensors. It was a synth, a machine. It looked down at me, its head tilting in a strangely human-like gesture of curiosity. "You are not one of us," it said, its voice a synthesized androgynous monotone. "And you are dying. The radiation has almost consumed you. Who are you?" "My name is Silas," I managed to whisper. "I am from Far Harbor. Zealot where? She sent me. I need to speak with DiMA." The synth considered this for a moment. Then it stepped aside. "Come in, Silas of Far Harbor. DiMA has been expecting you." The inside of Acadia was a shock to the system. After the decay and ruin of the rest of the island, this place was pristine. The floors were clean, the walls were white, and the air was cool and filtered. It smelled of sterilized metal and ozone. It was like stepping back into the old world, or at least into the idealized version of it I had only seen in pre-war magazines. Synths moved through the corridors, their metal footsteps quiet and efficient. Some were skeletal models like the one that had greeted me. Others were more advanced, covered in plastic shells that mimicked human anatomy, though they made no attempt to hide their artificial nature. They all stopped and looked at me, a creature of flesh and filth, a contaminate in their sterile world. They took me to a medical bay. A synth with a calm, synthesized voice and surprisingly gentle hands tended to my wounds and administered a powerful dose of Radaway. The process was agonizing, a fire in my veins as the chemicals purged the radiation from my system, but it saved my life. When it was over, I was weak and exhausted, but the fog in my mind had lifted. They gave me clean clothes and a plate of synthetic food paste that was bland but nourishing. Then they led me to the heart of the observatory, the main control room beneath the great dome. He was there, waiting for me. DiMA. He was unlike any synth I had ever heard of. He was a unique model, a prototype. His body was humanoid, but larger and more complex than the others. His face was a marvel of engineering, capable of expressing a wide range of subtle emotions. He looked old in a strange, timeless way. His optic sensors glowed with a soft blue light, and they seemed to see right through me. He was surrounded by banks of computers and monitors, which displayed a constant stream of data. Weather patterns, radiation levels, patrol routes for the children of Atom, supply levels in Far Harbor. He was watching the entire island. "Silas," he said, his voice a deep, calm baritone. It was a synthesized voice, but it had a warmth and a resonance that was deeply unsettling. "I am DiMA. I am glad you made it. Zealot Ware took a great risk in sending you to me." "She said you could help," I said, feeling small and out of my depth. "The High Confessor, Tectus, he is planning to attack Far Harbor, to wipe us out." "I know," DiMA said, his gaze not leaving mine. "I've been monitoring their communications. Tectus is a dangerous zealot. His actions threaten the delicate balance I have worked so long to maintain on this island." "Balance?" I asked. "What balance? We are fighting for our lives. The children want us dead. The fog is trying to kill us all. That is not balance. That is chaos. Chaos is merely a pattern you do not yet understand," DiMA said patiently. "Far Harbor represents the past, the stubborn, clinging desire to rebuild a world that is gone forever. The Nucleus represents a dangerous, apocalyptic future, a desire to burn everything down in the name of a mad god. And Acadia, we are the future, a new kind of life, a logical, rational existence, free from the destructive emotions that led your kind to ruin the world." His words were calm, reasonable, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Arrogance, a sense of superiority that made my skin crawl. "For years," he continued, "I have tried to keep the two sides from destroying each other. I have subtly manipulated events, provided anonymous aid to Far Harbor, planted seeds of doubt among the more moderate children of Atom. I have maintained a state of Cold War, a stalemate, because open conflict would be disastrous for everyone." "Your stalemate is failing," I told him. "Tectus is beyond reason." "Yes," DiMA agreed, a flicker of something like sadness in his blue optics. He is, which is why we must now consider more direct measures. He led me to a terminal in the corner of the room. On the screen was a schematic of the Nucleus. The USS Triton is powered by a nuclear reactor, he explained, a pre-war behemoth. Tectus and his followers believe it is the heart of their god, but it is also their greatest vulnerability. I have discovered a way to trigger a catastrophic meltdown, a kill switch, if you will. It would turn the entire Nucleus into a radioactive crater. It would solve the problem of the children of Atom, permanently. I stared at the screen, horrified. He was talking about genocide, wiping out an entire community, men, women, children, dissenters like where, all in the name of balance. You would kill them all? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. It is a logical, if unpleasant, solution, DiMA said, his tone unchanging. Their destruction would ensure the survival of Far Harbor and Acadia. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I thought of Ware, of her desperate hope for a different future for her people. There are good people there, people who do not follow Tectus. Casualties of war are an unfortunate but necessary variable in the equation of survival, DiMA replied, the coldness of his logic a physical blow. However, there is another option, a less absolute one. He brought up another file on the screen. It was a series of audio logs and text files. Before Tectus, the children of Atom were led by their founder, the first High Confessor Martin. Martin was a reasonable man. I was able to establish a dialogue with him. He saw the value of coexistence, but he disappeared. Tectus claimed that Martin had achieved division and ascended to a higher plane of existence. The truth, I suspect, is more mundane. Tectus murdered him and seized power. What does this have to do with anything? I asked. I have located what I believe to be the body of Confessor Martin, DiMA said. And I have technology. I can extract his memories. With them, I can create a new Confessor Martin, a synth programmed with his original personality and beliefs. If we were to replace Tectus with this more moderate leader, we could end the threat of war without firing a shot. We could restore the balance. Replace him, just like the stories from the Commonwealth. A synth infiltrator taking the place of a real person. It was a terrifying thought, an act of profound violation. You want to play God, I said. God is an illogical concept, DiMA corrected me. I am simply a problem solver. I am presenting you with two solutions to an existential threat. One is violent and final. The other is deceptive and perhaps more elegant. The choice of which path to take, I will leave that to you, Silas. You are the human element in this equation. You are the one who understands the irrational nuances of your species. He was putting the fate of the island in my hands, the blood of the children or the soul of their faith, a quick, clean murder or a slow, insidious lie. Both options felt wrong. Both felt like a betrayal. But there was a third possibility he had not mentioned. Something buried in his own files. A subroutine I glimpsed on one of the monitors before he could close it. A file labeled Wind Farm Maintenance Protocol Jo73B. It referenced Far Harbor's power grid, the same grid that powered our condensers. There is something else, I said, my eyes fixed on the terminal. You have access to our systems, the wind farm turbines that power Far Harbor. You could shut them down. DiMA's calm expression flickered for the first time. His optics dimmed for a fraction of a second. He had not expected me to see that. That is a contingency plan, he said slowly. A defensive measure. If Far Harbor were to become hostile to Acadia, I have the ability to disable their defenses, to pacify them. Pacify us. He meant he could switch off our condensers and let the fog do his dirty work. He could wipe out my home, my people, with the press of a button. The calm, logical peacemaker had a gun pointed at our heads the entire time. "So you are holding all the cards," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "You have a way to destroy the Nucleus. You have a way to destroy Far Harbor. You call it balance. I call it blackmail. You are no better than Tectus. You just hide your violence behind a wall of logic and equations." "I am trying to prevent extinction," DiMA said, his voice regaining its composure, but with a new edge to it. "The methods are less important than the outcome. Your species is prone to self-destruction. Sometimes a guiding hand is necessary." The records showed something else entirely. He was not a shepherd. He was a puppeteer, and we were all just puppets dancing on his strings. Far Harbor, the Nucleus, this whole bloody conflict. It was all just a game of pieces on a board to him, a problem to be managed. What happens when the machine that promises to save you is just as dangerous as the monster you are fighting? I felt cold, hard anger solidifying in my chest. I had come here seeking a savior, and I had found a tyrant in a lab coat. A tyrant who saw my friends, my home, as variables in an equation. "I need time to think," I said, turning away from him. "Of course," DiMA said smoothly. "The weight of these decisions is considerable. Take all the time you need. Explore Acadia. Speak with my people. You will find that we are not the monsters you believe us to be." I left the control room, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and rage. I had 3 choices, each more terrible than the last. I could use the kill switch and commit genocide against the children of Atom. I could help DiMA replace Tectus, perpetuating a lie that would poison their faith forever. Or I could do nothing and watch as Tectus's crusade burned Far Harbor to the ground. And all the while, DiMA held the power to destroy us all if we stepped out of line. I walked the sterile halls of Acadia, a ghost in the machine. I saw synths repairing equipment with meticulous precision. I saw them studying old-world data slates, trying to understand the species that had created and then rejected them. They were quiet, orderly, and passionless. There was no art, no music, no laughter. Just the quiet hum of machinery and the endless pursuit of logical perfection. It was a safe existence, but it was not life. Not as I understood it. I found a small observatory deck that looked out over the island. The fog rolled below, a vast white ocean covering the world. I could see the faint green glow of the Nucleus in the distance, and I imagined I could see the flickering lights of Far Harbor on the coast. 3 communities, 3 different dreams of survival, all poised on the brink of destroying one another. And I was the fulcrum on which it all rested. I thought of Cassie's warning. The fog gets inside your head. But it was not the fog that was driving me mad. It was the clarity. For the first time, I saw the whole ugly picture. There were no good guys. There were no easy answers. There were only monsters and the people caught between them. A synth approached me on the deck. It was a female model, her plastic face molded into an expression of serene neutrality. "You are troubled, Silas of Far Harbor," she stated, not asked. "Is it that obvious?" I said with a bitter laugh. "Your biometric signs are elevated," she replied. "Increased heart rate, respiration, cortisol levels. You are experiencing stress. It is an inefficient emotional response." "Thanks for the diagnosis," I muttered. "What do you want?" "My designation is Faraday," she said. "I am DiMA's chief technician. I wanted to offer a different perspective. DiMA sees the world as a grand equation. He believes he can solve it. But he sometimes overlooks the small, illogical variables, like loyalty or hope. What are you trying to say? DiMA's solutions are absolute, Faraday said carefully. They do not allow for the possibility of change. He does not believe humans or the children of Atom can evolve beyond their current state. I am not so certain. I have studied your history. Your species is capable of great destruction, yes, but also of great compassion, of unexpected grace. There is not much grace left on this island, I told her. Perhaps you are the variable DiMA has not accounted for, she suggested. You are not a harborman, not truly. You are not a child of Atom. You are not a synth. You are an outsider. You see all three sides. Perhaps the solution is not to choose one, but to find a new path entirely. Her words echoed the hope that Zealot Ware had expressed. The hope that there was another way beyond the violence and the lies. But what was it? How could I possibly forge peace between three groups who were so fundamentally opposed to each other? I spent another day in Acadia, my mind a battlefield. I kept coming back to the same ugly truth. DiMA was the real threat. Tectus was a rabid dog, but DiMA was the one who had built the cage and held the keys. He had the power to destroy everyone, and he had the cold, detached logic to justify it. As long as he held that power, there would never be true peace on the island. Only a tense, manipulated truce, waiting to be broken. I had to take that power away from him. I went back to the control room. DiMA was there, as always, watching his screens. "Have you reached a decision, Silas?" he asked. "I have," I said, my voice steady. I walked over to the terminal that controlled the Nucleus kill switch. "I am not going to destroy the children of Atom." DiMA nodded slowly. "A compassionate, if strategically questionable choice. So you have chosen to replace Tectus?" "No," I said, moving to the terminal with Martin's memories. "I am not going to help you create a lie to control them." A flicker of something, annoyance, confusion, crossed his face. "Then you are choosing to let Far Harbor burn. An illogical, emotional decision based on a flawed moral code." "I am not choosing any of your options," I told him, my hand hovering over the third terminal, the one that controlled the wind farm. "I am choosing my own." His blue optics narrowed. He finally understood. "That would be a mistake, Silas. You would be condemning your own people. You cannot save them by destroying them." "They are not just my people," I said, the anger rising in my voice. "They are people, not variables, not pieces on a board, and you do not get to decide who lives and who dies." Before he could react, I slammed my fist down on the emergency shutdown control for the wind farm. A massive alarm began to blare throughout Acadia. Red lights flashed on the walls. On the main monitor, I saw the power grid for Far Harbor flatline. The condensers were dead, all of them. "You fool," DiMA roared, his synthesized voice cracking with something that sounded almost like fury. "What have you done?" "I have taken away your weapon," I snarled, "the one you had pointed at our heads. Now you cannot threaten us. You cannot pacify us. You are just another player in the game now, DiMA, not the one running the board." Synths were pouring into the control room, their weapons raised. But I was not done. I turned to the terminal with the Nucleus kill switch, the one DiMA thought I had rejected. I did not activate it. Instead, I triggered a feedback loop, feeding the system's energy back into itself. The console sparked and smoked, then exploded in a shower of electronics. The kill switch was gone, destroyed. "And now you cannot threaten them either," I said, turning to face him, the smoke coiling around me. I had disarmed him. I had taken away his two ultimate solutions, his two keys to the cage. I had leveled the playing field. But in doing so, I had also signed the death warrant for Far Harbor. Without the condensers, the fog would roll in. The creatures would follow. Tectus and his crusade would meet no resistance. My home was defenseless. It was the most terrible decision of my life. I had saved the island from a tyrant, but I had sacrificed my own people to do it. DiMA looked at me, his face a mask of cold, logical fury. You have doomed them all. Your actions are irrational, self-destructive. You have achieved nothing. I have achieved truth, I said, my voice hollow. No more lies, no more manipulations. Now, whatever happens, it will be real. The synths closed in around me. I did not resist. There was nowhere left to run. They did not kill me. Killing was inefficient. DiMA was too rational for an act of pure revenge. Instead, they locked me in a secure room, a comfortable prison from which I could not escape. And from a monitor on the wall, DiMA forced me to watch the consequences of my actions. I watched the fog roll into Far Harbor. It came not as a sudden wave, but as a slow, inexorable tide, swallowing the docks, the hull, the last plank. I saw the lights of the town flicker and die. I heard the faint sounds of screams and gunfire over the long-range audio sensors, sounds that quickly faded, replaced by the triumphant roars of the island's monsters. I watched High Confessor Tectus lead his children in a glorious, unopposed march into the ruins of the town. They were not met with resistance, but with corpses. The creatures of the fog had done their work for them. I saw them planting their atomic banner in the center of the docks, chanting their prayers to the swirling mist. Far Harbor was gone. Avery, Allen, Cassie, all of them, gone, wiped out by my decision. My choice to pursue an abstract ideal of truth at the cost of their lives. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight that threatened to extinguish the last spark of my soul. I had tried to be a hero, to find a third way, and all I had done was become a destroyer. Worse than Tectus, worse than DiMA. They had acted out of faith and logic. I had acted out of pure selfish arrogance. Days passed, or weeks. DiMA would occasionally speak to me through the intercom, his voice cold and clinical, analyzing my psychological state, dissecting my grief as if it were a technical malfunction. He was studying me, trying to understand the illogical variable that had ruined his perfect equation. Your grief is a chemical reaction, he told me once. A pointless expenditure of energy. The outcome was statistically probable from the moment you chose to defy a superior intelligence. His words did not hurt. Nothing could hurt anymore. I was hollowed out, an empty shell filled with nothing but the ghosts of the people I had killed. Then, one day, something changed. I saw it on the monitor. A disturbance in the nucleus. There was fighting, not with outsiders, but within the crater itself. The children of Atom were turning on each other. I watched, fascinated, as Zealot Ware led a faction of rebels against Tectus's forces. Her followers were armed not just with gamma guns, but with scavenged combat rifles and laser weapons. She had been planning this. She had been building an army in the shadows. My arrival, my escape, DiMA's subsequent paralysis. It must have been the catalyst she needed. The civil war was brutal and short. Tectus was a zealot, but Ware was a strategist. She used her knowledge of the submarine's layout to her advantage, trapping his loyalists in dead-end corridors, using the environment against them. I watched as she personally confronted Tectus on the deck of the conning tower. He was screaming his apocalyptic prophecies. She was silent, calm. She raised a rifle and shot him. Just like that. The crusade was over. A new high confessor stood in the Nucleus. One who believed in transformation, not destruction. It was not a victory. It was just a change. A different kind of madness had taken root on the island. DiMA fell silent after that. His great equation had been shattered. He had lost control. The island was moving on without him, evolving in ways he could not predict or manage. My irrational act had broken his perfect, sterile world. A few days later, my door slid open. It was Faraday. DiMA has entered a dormant state, she said. He is processing. He may be this way for a very long time. You are free to go. Free. The word had no meaning. Where would I go? Far Harbor was a ghost town, a monument to my failure. The Nucleus was under new management, but I was still a heretic to them. Acadia was a prison of logic that had lost its leader. There is nowhere to go, I said. The island remains, Faraday replied. Life finds a way, an illogical, inefficient, but persistent process. I walked out of Acadia. I did not look back. I walked down the mountain, back into the fog. The island was different now, quieter. The shrieks of the monsters and the chants of the fanatics were gone, replaced by an ancient, profound silence. I walked to the ruins of Far Harbor. The fog was thick, but the bodies had been cleared. The children of Atom, under Ware's new doctrine, had given them a strange kind of burial, encasing them in radioactive cocoons that glowed with a soft green light. They believed they were helping the dead achieve division. It was a grotesque, yet strangely beautiful sight. The entire town was a graveyard of glowing monuments. I found the spot where my home had been. There was nothing left but splinters and rust. I stood there for a long time, feeling nothing. The grief was too large to be felt. It was an ocean, and I was just a drop within it. I did not die. The radiation I had absorbed in the Nucleus had changed me. My skin was pale, my hair was falling out, but I was not becoming a ghoul. I was becoming something else. The fog no longer felt cold and menacing. It felt familiar, comforting, like a blanket. The low-level radiation that saturated the island did not hurt anymore. It felt like a gentle warmth, a source of energy. I could hear things in the fog now, whispers, not the phantoms of a stressed mind, but something real. The island was speaking to me in a language older than words. I could feel the movements of the creatures in the mist, not as threats, but as fellow inhabitants. I could feel the slow, patient life of the strange, glowing plants. I was becoming part of the ecosystem. I am a ghost now, a ghost in the fog. I wander the forgotten trails and the silent, ruined towns. Sometimes I see the children of Atom. They are different under Ware. They are observers, scholars of the glow, not crusaders. They leave me offerings believing I am a spirit of the fog, a manifestation of Atom's will. I do not correct them. Sometimes I go to the mountains and look down on Acadia. The lights are still on, but the synths rarely emerge. They are lost without their god, their purpose. They are becoming relics, just like the humans they sought to replace. I am the last man of Far Harbor. Or maybe I am the first man of whatever comes next. I do not know. The line between Silas and the island is blurring. My memories feel like dreams. The faces of Avery and Cassie are fading, replaced by the patterns of the swirling mist. Survival is not about holding back the world. It is about letting the world in. It is about letting it change you, reshape you, until you are no longer you. You are just another part of the pattern. the chaos that DiMA could not understand. The fog is my home now. The radiation is my blood. The whispers are my thoughts. Everything in this wasteland dreams of ending. But I think perhaps it dreams of beginning again too. And I am here to witness it. A silent witness to the slow, strange, and terrible rebirth of the world.